Hi, everybody, it's Ivan. And recently I had a conversation with a leader that I was coaching, and he asked me, he said, in simple terms, tell me why implementations and initiatives fail. It's such a great question, right? Why, after all of the effort you put into putting a product together or putting a system together or putting something that you need to implement in an organization together, why does it fail? Well, let me take a step back, first of all, and tell you where we're living. We're living in what we call a VUCA environment, right? The V stands for volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex and ambiguous. VUCA. Does that sound like the world you're living in? Well, in a VUCA environment, we can't just put out a technical solution and think that people are going to accept that and you're going to get really great results. Now, I like to sort of share an equation with you. The equation is Q times A equals E. Now, the Q is your initiative, your quality initiative. You know that it's really good, right? So you have the Q. If you multiply that by A, which is the acceptance, that equals E, your execution. So think about it. Typically, when you put together a solution, that Q, if I put it in this formula here, if you put it out, the Q is great. So let's say the Q is a 10, but you did nothing to gain acceptance around your initiative. Then let's say your A equals 5, right? I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. What's your execution score? Yeah, it's 50, right? So when we get a score like that and we think, gosh, people just aren't getting it, they're not adapting it, they're not changing. What do you think we do after that? We go back into the laboratory and we work on the Q, when we really should be working on the A. The A for acceptance is what's really going to help us get that product off the ground or that initiative off the ground. So let me put the formula back in play. Q is 10, right? Your initiative is great. A, because you did a lot of work on gaining acceptance and getting people to adapt and getting people to understand what the product was. Now your A is not a 5, but it's a 7, let's say. Let's just make it a 7. And so your Q times A now equals 70, right? The more emphasis you put on that A as opposed to that Q, the better. So that's what we're up against. We're up against a volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous environment, and we have all of these solutions that we're trying to put out, but we have to understand that a technical solution is very different from adaptive solution, and adaptive solutions need adaptive challenges. Why? Because it requires new behaviors and new ways of thinking, and a lot of the times the expertise that you're looking for doesn't exist within your group to get things done. And people don't know how to solve the problem, and people are typically the problem. So in situations like that, here's what you need to do. You need to think of some of the things that you need to do to get leaders to shift from being just a leader to an adaptive leader. And that's moving them from being problem solvers to disruptors, and from being repetitive into being innovative, and then from being exclusive to being influencers, and restrictive, move them from being restrictive to being expansive, and from being sort of what we call the directive and using directive behaviors and move them into the learning behaviors that will help them succeed. See, in a VUCA environment and in the world that we're living in with pandemics and social injustice, we really need to understand that people are not just looking for solutions, they're looking for adaptive solutions. So I'm going to give you 5 things that I believe you need to focus on as leaders as a foundation. There's so much more than this, but from a foundational perspective, I want to give you 5 things you need to think about. Number 1, you have to have positive intent. Adaptive leaders have positive intent and know that if you are trying to get something done, I'm going to assume that everyone has positive intent and I have positive intent. And then I have to be vulnerable. Vulnerability is tough. It's one of those tough things because people don't like to open themselves up to being vulnerable, but as an adaptive leader, you really do need to be vulnerable. And also you have to build trust. I've been involved in a lot of conversations with leaders around trust. And the big thing about trust is it's so nebulous and not really tangible. There's a book called The Speed of Trust. It's by Stephen M.R. Covey, that's Stephen Covey's son, he wrote a book called Speed of Trust. And I think trust is so important as adaptive leaders because he says in this book, when trust is high, speed goes up and cost goes down. Think about it. When trust is high, speed goes up and cost goes down. And when trust is low, speed goes down and cost goes up. Exactly right. So the economics of trust are very, very powerful. Another thing adaptive leaders need is to have a willingness to learn. It's so funny that when people come into an organization, they come in what I call on the curve of relevance. If you think about this bell curve, they come in on one side of the curve of relevance being highly, highly open-minded and want to learn and trying to get as much information as they possibly can. And as they continue to work in the organization and they get up to that curve and they're learning, what happens at the very top is they close themselves off from learning and then they become less relevant and slide down the other side. You have to have a willingness to learn and stay on the right side of the curve of relevance. And then of course you have to have a desire to build relationships. You can't do anything in an organization unless you have people to do it. People don't just bring their heads to work, they bring their hearts to work. And so you have to build the relationship. And then the last thing, and I'll give you this one, I said there were 5, but I'm gonna give you one more. You need to be resilient. And building resilience is an important thing because when you think about resilience, it's not just being resilient, it's really thriving, right? It's not just surviving, it's really thriving in the VUCA environment that we live in. So when it comes to adaptive leadership, when you think about why initiatives fail and why they don't do as well as you had hoped that they would do, or sometimes, you get mediocre results, I promise you, Q times A equals E. Focus on the acceptance. Focus on being an adaptive leader and do what you need to make sure that the initiative meets the people from a place that is a place in their heart. And I say this all the time to people, we know a lot and we do a lot, but people don't care how much we know until they know how much we care. And that's what adaptive leaders do. They offer care in these situations, and especially in the world we're living in today. So thank you for listening and have a great day.